Hello and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I am your host for today, Maria Roa, and I am happy to introduce you to Alessandra Binazzi. Alessandra is a seasoned professional with a passion for global markets and cross-cultural communication. With proficiency in multiple languages and a background in business and technology, she has championed international user experiences and helped companies expand globally. Alessandra, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Maria. It's very nice to be here.
No, it is really great that you could join us today. Well, I want to start asking you because you had a various experience in different companies, sports, music. In your experience, what are the key components of an effective globalization strategy for business expanding into international markets?
There's several things that companies need to keep in mind. Of course, I'm going to be speaking about, general terms. Obviously, every company is different, so there's definitely specific things that one needs to look at. But in general terms, I would say the most important element is really alignment with the organization's international expansion goals. So oftentimes in globalization, localization, we kind of focus on our own competencies and language and adaptation, but we really need to make sure that our work is fully aligned with the broader company goals. So a successful strategy really should be aligned with the broader organizational goals. This means understanding the objectives, strategic objectives, as well as operational and tactical objectives of expanding and really succeeding in international markets. So whether it's increasing market share or enhancing customer satisfaction or driving revenue growth, globalization and localization really needs to be a key enabler of all of these goals. So they have to be front and center, even in our strategic planning. On top of that, of course, a deep understanding of local markets. So really trying to understand how local users behave, cultural nuances, preferences, even taboos. But most importantly, it's essential to define and understand specific personas that the organization has identified for itself and see what those profiles look like in those target markets. Mm-hmm. And this way, by using this, you can then guide the adaptation of your product features, of your marketing material, of your user interface, et cetera, to the specific market. A solid understanding and alignment with the company's brand identity and tone of voice. Again, we mostly work with messaging and communication. So really having a deep understanding of the brand guidelines and the tone of voice of the company itself, and then aligning that with the multilingual style guides and terminology, and all the language assets that we use should really be in alignment with the broader brand and tone of voice. And then these are really important things. This is more in detail with localization specifically. So a coherent strategy for the key pillars of any program, and those are people, process, technology, and now data. It used to be that we focused only on people, process, and technology. Not that those are small things, they're important pillars, but we often did not talk outright about data. And now in the AI world, data is the new currency, really, in many cases. So this needs to become a new pillar that we focus on and we include in our strategic planning. Technology in particular here is a major component. Having a robust and flexible tech stack is essential for any globalization, localization program. Those I would say are really the key components that you want to make sure you consider in your planning.
Okay, so I was taking notes here. We said alignment with company goals, understanding the objectives, deep understanding of global markets and our target personas, solid understanding and aligning of brand guidelines, and data and technology, right?
Absolutely. And of course, never forget people and processes, which are the other pillars of any program. Yep.
Perfect. That sounds great. Also, could you share some best practices for managing the localization operations across diverse regions and languages?
Sure. And I'm sure for a lot of people, I'm not, disclosing any trade secrets here, but really the most important best practices I can talk about is centralization of the program. So having a centralized program, but with local expertise. So really managing projects from a centralized hub. This ensures consistency, it ensures efficiency, but also economies of scale. So really making the centralized function more of a center of excellence is really important, but also having local involvement. So making sure that you include also local experts, whether those are in-house. A lot of companies have regional or local offices, so really working with those or finding resources in countries that can help you out. This guarantees the cultural accuracy and relevance of your messaging. So that would be paramount, I would say. The use of localization technology, we will go back to this point, I think, throughout this conversation, but implementing tools, centralized tools, especially like TMSs, using machine translation, and now large language models. These tools all help streamline workflows, automating repetitive tasks. It ensures, again, consistency of the localized content. And in addition, and very importantly these days, having these systems in place allow you to also monitor, track, and monitor data, both operational data for localization, but also quality data. Which brings me to the next best practice, which is, of course, having a solid quality program in place is always important. There is many different ways of looking at quality, so I wouldn't dictate any best practice for this specifically, but you do have to have a quality program of some sort. Of course, with new technologies now, and tools are offering lots of new QA features, we can really expand or make our quality programs much more sophisticated. So that's an important best practice as well. Terminology, this is no new thing for us. Terminology has always been important in localization, but now more than ever, with the advent of large language models, terminology has become an asset that we can really leverage effectively with these new technologies. So that becomes even more of a focus than before. Looking at user data, so not just localization information or localization data, but really making sure that we collaborate with local stakeholders or with our consumer insights teams to understand our local markets, but mostly to track the user behavior, user performance, so that you can easily adapt your program based on that data. And then finally, but not least important, is innovation. I think this should be a best practice in every program. So staying current and providing continuous training to your teams on new tools, on new processes or trends in the market and in localization, so that teams then are more motivated and also positioned in using innovative practices in your program and really suggesting how to evolve the program given new technologies. So I think innovation should also be included as one of the best practices.
Wow. Okay. So many things to take into consideration.
So many things.
Yes. We are talking also adapting products or services to different contexts, different cultural contexts requires a thoughtful and user-centric approach. Which do you think are the key considerations that we should take into account?
That's a really good question. I think sometimes in our work, our daily work, we focus so much on our processes and on our quality and our, the quality of the language that we produce. And we sometimes forget about the user. So we should really take after the example of product teams that always have the user front and center. So follow some of those best practices, I would say. So first of all, local user research. So really conducting consumer insights research with local users to understand the behavior in local market, their preferences and their pain points.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, oftentimes companies do this, they have large departments of consumer insights that look at this data, but they don't always break it down by market, which is super simple in our mind, right? We're like, okay, can I see this for Germany, for example? And they're like, oh no, we only look at, you know, a comprehensive user, and that's not good enough. So even if they have sophisticated data models for this, sometimes they don't think as simply as breaking it down by market or user segment within a market. So really important to look at consumer insight per market. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
usability testing, which is another area where oftentimes local users are not included. So it really is our role as globalizers to make sure that the local users for international markets are included in this usability testing. And then these insights are included in the decisions that are made around product. Um, some kind of feedback mechanism. So, you don't want to do this data gathering and monitoring only once, and then you don't look at them anymore. You want to somehow constantly get feedback from your users. So establishing some methodology for consumer feedback. It can be surveys. It can be, again, user testing with iterations. All of these things can provide some feedback mechanism. And finally, personalization options. This is maybe a more mature type of approach that you can use, but once you get to understand your users in different markets better, you can really start um, offering or proposing personalization options. And I can give you an example of when I worked at ASICS, for example, and
Mm-hmm.
we worked with our fitness apps, and our fitness app was an app that tracked your running activities, running or any other sporting activity. And in looking at our different markets, we noticed that our Japanese users, for example, which was a key market for us because ASICS is a Japanese company, were using our apps in a much more serious way. So they weren't really recreational runners or swimmers or walkers. They really were using the app to train for a 5K, a 10K, a half marathon, etc. And so we were able to create marketing promotions and initiatives and deploy them through the app that were specific for the Japanese users, for those users that were training for these events. Over a US user, for example, where the main purpose of using the app was more for recreational use. So this is how you can really start personalizing your offering for different markets.
Yeah, I think you really must comprehend how culture influences user experiences.
Mhm.
And it is, you were talking about usability and personalization. And I think that's really interesting because you need to also, when you adapt a product, you need to understand about the human-centered interaction of your product, how it involves, um, how your product is involved in the interaction of your client. How are they going to be incorporating your product or service into their life,
Their life, absolutely.
Yeah,
In
so
fact, like
you
mobile usage is much more prominent in Asia, for example, all throughout Asia. And so even looking at your product in that sense, exactly, how is it being used? You can't have a very text heavy product if it's going to be presented mostly on a screen, on a mobile screen, meaning. So, yeah, lots of local considerations that you can take into
Yeah, and
account.
also an inclusivity, sorry, and accessibility, because you need
Absolutely.
to take in consideration factors like physical abilities, language barriers, and stuff like that. That also needs to
Absolutely.
be at the top of our thought whenever we do this type of things.
Absolutely. Yeah, especially when you come to multimodal, like,
Mm,
videos and
yes,
multilingual, and, you need to make sure you're providing
even when you're doing
captions
a
and,
web.
yeah, all of that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you for that. What are some of the common challenges that companies face during the localization efforts, and how do you think they can overcome those?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Here we come with more
I
challenges.
know,
What I was
I
thinking
know.
about.
Yeah, these are, I mean, I can think of some top ones that are, I encounter in um, different, a variety of companies. I would say the first one that I will mention, it may not be the first one that comes to mind to everybody, is to be fully integrated within the organization content
Hmm?
lifecycle. So, still to this day, many localization functions are very siloed. They kind of work in a vacuum a little bit. They're at the end of a process, they're not really involved upstream. And this is something that many localization functions struggle with. Any company, large, small, mediums, less at startups, I would say, but everywhere else. So, really ensuring that localization is embedded into the entire content life cycle from creation to delivery is essential, because this ensures that the localization considerations are included in the strategy and the tech and the tactical plans, that we're not just an afterthought, right? And that we are also included in projects at the very beginning, from the very beginning of the project, rather than at the very end when all decisions have been made.
Can I say something? I think the challenge there is that sometimes they don't know where to start the localization
Yeah,
process. They
yeah,
feel
yeah,
like uncertain about
yeah,
where to begin, when they need to expand to new markets and how they can do that. So I think that's why they don't embed it, because they don't know
yeah.
when.
You're absolutely right. In many cases, departments don't know when to start localization. They often think they have to do everything else before they involve localization, but that's a huge mistake. There's a few ways I've been able to embed localization in some functions. For product functions, for example, it's really effective to include localization in the definition of done of a product, or of a feature or of a new release. So including the localization check in there is key to being included up front. And the other way that was very effective, at least in organizations that use OKRs, is having shared OKRs with other departments and other functions. So, for example, I was able to embed localization in the marketing process, campaign process, at one client organization, because we had a shared OKR to make sure that the content that we created in English was globalized. And then that the localization timelines were included in the campaign timelines. So things like that will help in getting you embedded. It may take several different tries, but it can work.
Do you think maybe they don't, also another reason why they don't embed it from the beginning, it is because they lack the resources, and they feel like, no, until I am not bigger and I don't have the resources, I won't be going till this next step?
I'm not sure. It may be, but if they have localization, it means they've committed to some other
Yeah,
markets.
you're right.
So they should still include it. Now, of course, if we're talking about expansion into markets, that could be the case, right? It could be like, oh, we still have so much to do in our domestic market. We don't want to, get distracted with starting to penetrate in another market. So in that case, I could see how that may be the case. So some other challenges, for example, resource allocation. This is not only a localization challenge, but of course, every function probably struggles with that. We would love to have infinite resources, but we cannot. I think for localization is particularly challenging because, of course, we cover so many markets, but also we cover so many functions. So we're very cross-functional. So being able to cover all those needs with limited resourcing is very difficult. So that would be another big challenge, not uncommon to many others, but another one I would say is legacy or outdated tech stack. I think I see a lot of organizations that are using old tools that haven't upgraded, or maybe they should have switched tools, but they haven't, because it's difficult. I understand it's hard to change tools. It takes a lot of effort and investment, etc. But it also means that if you don't do that, you really fall behind, and then it's very difficult to catch up. So making sure that your tech stack is current, and that is flexible enough that can be, updated with new technologies, is essential, really. Let's see. One more that I'd like to mention, maybe two more. One quickly is technical and data resources. So oftentimes in localization, we're the realm of the language experts, right? And we often rely on the other organizations, so, the development teams or the data teams, to provide those services to us. But that's not ideal, because oftentimes then our leaders, our localization leaders, spend a lot of effort trying to get on a roadmap for the developers or the data team, and then getting our point prioritized on that roadmap. And we usually often end up at the bottom of that list. So it's really hard to get technical and data projects or initiatives done without some of your own resources. So I would say, try to limit the dependency on other teams when it comes to tech and data. And finally, just reliable methods for local user research and gathering user data. Again, this is not usually our realm, so we have to rely on other departments. So sometimes localization teams find that to be quite challenging.
Thank you for that. We're almost at the end of this interview. I'm sorry, but I love talking to you, but we're almost at the end of the time. But before we go, I want to ask you obviously about technology, because it's evolving super fast. And I would like to know, what are the emerging trends that you see in the field of globalization and localization coming?
Yeah, no surprises here. Of course, AI and large language models, that's the biggest trend that everybody's talking about and everybody's working on. Rightfully so. There's a lot that we still need to understand here. So we know in principle what the potential is, but of course then putting it into practice and deploying these models in a production environment, it's a whole different story. But that would be a big trend, of course. Integration and automation, this is also not very new, but still very relevant in localization. We still work with systems, content repositories throughout organizations that are very diverse and work in very different ways. So being able to connect, integrate directly with them to allow for automation and process is really continues to be a trend and key. Another thing that I see a lot of talk about is multimodal localization. So incorporating image, video, and audio context into the localization process so that you can improve the output, make it more relevant for the user by looking at, context beyond just text. So automating that somehow. And this is a little bit related also to multimedia localization. There's a lot happening in multimedia localization.
Mm-hmm.
So, audio, video localization, there's advanced technologies like, well, speech recognition has been around forever, but there's obviously new and improved ways of deploying it. Synthetic voices, AI avatars, like all of these new advancements in multimedia localization are coming into play. And finally, and we touched upon it a little bit, is content personalization. So, personalization is important in general, but with localization, and with new technologies, we have new opportunities to localize or to personalize content, not only for specific users, but also for specific markets. So those, I would say, are the main trends.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you. But before we go, is there anything else you are working on that you would like to share with our audience?
There's a few projects that I'm working on now that are really interesting because they involve new technologies, so AI and large language models. So maybe I could mention briefly these. So with one client, we are working on a project we're basically developing a customized generative AI portal to change or advance the content creation and localization process for specific types of content, like product descriptions, for example, taglines, and other types of content that historically were very challenging to tackle, especially in terms of efficiency and quality of output. These types of content were always very difficult to create and to localize. So we're trying to really improve that process through this generative AI portal. And then with another organization, we are building a pretty sophisticated data pipeline that integrates the organization's language assets into it. So the pipeline is basically designed to be leveraged by LLMs, large language model, to create localized content while enforcing the company's tone of voice. So is really kind of enabling the LLM or empowering the LLM with the company's tone of voice so that the content that it outputs is really relevant for the local user, but also complies with the company's brand tone of voice. So these projects kind of exemplify our commitment to innovation and localization. And we're trying to really integrate these advanced technologies to focus on user centricity, like we were talking about before. So we're hoping that these projects are successful and to have lots more in the future as well.
Well, if anyone in our audience wants to talk to you about those projects or any others, can they contact you through LinkedIn, through an email?
Yeah.
How is it?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best way. And I'm pretty good at answering people. So, I welcome your connections.
Okay, so it is Alessandra Binazzi with double S and double Z in the last name and B. So
Excellent.
thank you so
Yes.
much, Alessandra.
Thank you.
And that's the end of today's show with Alessandra Binazzi. Please make sure to tune in again to see or to listen to the next VistaTalks show, where we will be discussing more interesting topics with interesting people from all around the world.